comes down to a fight between you and me, then you are doomed to lose.
Keep the red flag flying here.
Help if I actually turn my mic on. Thank you, Leanne. I've done it already. Yes, you know, it's. I thought about getting an L plate for myself to actually put in the corner, but I couldn't find one on the system we need. So I am still learning, but at least it's not. At least I didn't fail because I didn't turn to the left. For those of you who don't know. So welcome again to Socialist Think Tank, Socialist Night Live. This is the first of our region shows. We have Socialist Think Tank South East, and so we've got Alison and Jane. And I'm from Socialist Think Tank West Midlands. In case the accent doesn't give it away, I'm Mark Lungley. And we've been joined by Stuart as well, because unfortunately another one of the West Midlands guys had to pull out. But do you guys want to just introduce yourselves first of all? This is the fun with Apple. They haven't seen. Let me just make sure a few checks on my audio. This is the thing with this. Apple have done some weird and wonderful things. Let me just make sure on the old audio here. Oh, don't you just love it? How's that? Can you hear us? Can you hear us now? Do you want to speak, Jane?
Can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear us?
Hey. We should have really tried this, but Paul and I were having to suddenly found there was differences between the between Windows and Apple. Can you hear? Do you guys want to speak? Can you hear?
Oh, Tim, thank you.
I can't hear them now. Don't you just love tech? Yeah. I'm just going to have to try and see if I can get the audio in my things. Oh, don't you just love this? I shall have to start. I shall have to go back to using a normal computer, the Apple. Brilliant for computers, but not for everything else.
Shall we start again then?
Do you guys want to carry on? Yeah.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Alison. I live in Windsor. I'm Secretary of Windsor Labour Party and one of the co-founders of Save Our Socialists, and also with Jane, we're going to start up the Socialist Think Tank South East. So really excited to be here this evening as part of our first regional show.
Lovely. I'll jump in. I'm Stuart. I think most people watching this will know who I am, as I get chucked in for everything. I'm the secretary of Sedgefield CLP. I've got many hats. I try to do many jobs. I'm not wholly proficient at them all at once.
I think you're brilliant at all of them, Stuart, and thank you for being here with us tonight. I'm Jane. So I'm one of the Socialist think tank members that's starting up Socialist think tank Southeast with Alison. I'm really excited about that. And it's nice to be here today, and I'm really happy that we're talking about the housing crisis because it's such a huge and important issue, and I really care about this a lot. So it's good to be raising some awareness about it and having a chance to have some discussions about it. So I think the first thing we were going to talk about, we were going to start off the evening with talking about the private rental market, which is quite a huge subject. But we're just starting off looking at the financial obstacles that renters face. So Alison, I don't know if you wanted to say a bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. So I actually am a private renter. It causes me a lot of grief, really, in my life. Mainly because, I mean, obviously I live in Windsor, so it's not the cheapest place to live, but I choose to live here, and I want to carry on living here if I can. But, you know, I've had all sorts of problems. I actually rented off Eton College once for a couple of years until they decided they needed to give my house to some teachers from Eton College, so I had to move. Most recently I was renting and, you know, my landlord decided to sell the house, so I had to move again. So, you know, and all of this is causes me angst because I have 2 dogs, so it's always a problem to try and find somewhere that will allow you to have pets and things like that. And, you know, then you've got the problem of trying to find a deposit because your deposit's in a holding account and you can't get it until 3 or 4 weeks after you've moved, so you need to find another deposit. So it's a really expensive business, the moving costs and all of that. So yeah, I think there needs to be a better solution to all of this, trying to find, you know, a way of maybe holding the deposit and moving it with you and things like that. I actually lost quite a lot of my deposit when I moved last time as well, because the landlord accused my dogs of soiling carpets, which I isn't the case. But anyway, I did lose quite a lot of my deposit, so it was a bit unfortunate. Yeah, so it's just, you know, it's just a nightmare, really. And also you're never really settled somewhere. You know, I mean, I've signed a year's lease, so I'm worried that probably next May, you know, I might have to move again. So, you know, it's really difficult to sort of settle and, you know, things like that. So
It's difficult, isn't it? I'm a private renter too, so I've got a few decades of private renting behind me, and I can really sympathise with that. Especially, I know London, it's horrendous, and I lived up your way for a while, Alison, and it's so expensive, it's ridiculous. And I think another part of the problem is the rents go up every year, even, you know, if you're an existing tenant, there's no cap on that. So I mean, it's legal for your landlord to double the rent every year. There's no protections against that. The way the laws are set up are quite silly. I think the only time you can actually legally challenge a rent increase is within the first 6 months of living there, but that's not going to happen during that time. So that's, you know, that's not really any reasonable protection. And then I think we were talking earlier on about the deposits. They're so expensive, and the thing is, you don't get your old deposit back until you've paid your new one already. So you need, as a private renter, to have a couple of £1,000s just sitting around in the bank all the time, spare, on top of the couple of £1,000s you've already paid out for the existing deposit if you ever want to move. And that's not very practical, especially when you're paying very expensive rents. I don't know, Stuart, I don't know if you've got any experience of this area.
I mean, currently, I'd like to say I own my own home. The bank owns a big chunk of my home, but previously I was a private renter, and I would be terrified to be a private renter right now. The feeling of uncertainty, and with as how the housing market is driven by people leaning on it for pensions or as investments, means that people get thrown to the side when people think that there's a good deal on offer, that they might want to sell a home and cash out. And the people involved, you know, the huge human aspect of homes is just totally diminished for the sake of profit. And honestly, solidarity to anybody who's just renting, let alone renting from a bad landlord or in really dire circumstances.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Is there anything you wanted to add on this subject? So I'm gonna go on to our the next bit about renting then. So do renters feel insecure, which I think we've already established that yes they do, and what's the impact of this on their mental health? So Alison, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the stress of not knowing when you might have to move again. I mean, I've been lucky. I've sort of stayed somewhere 2 or 3 years. The place I'm in at the moment, the actual owner of the house is in a home. He unfortunately has dementia, so you know, it's always worrying to know what's going to happen. If obviously the worst happens to him, and what are the family going to do? And so yeah, I'm always constantly worrying about that. And then I've got to try and find the money to save up for the deposit and also the moving costs because, it's so expensive to move. So you've got to get the house professionally cleaned, carpets cleaned, all of that. And then invariably you need to get it re-cleaned because the checkout people don't like it and things like that. Also, when I moved last time, I actually got it professionally cleaned and I had a guarantee that if the checkout report, didn't come up with some other things, they would come and fix it. But then the landlord decided they didn't want to invoke that guarantee, so I still had to pay. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Things like that. It's just crazy. So I'm sort of learning each time I move about I'm trying to get it right, and you keep coming up against all these difficult things. So yeah, I'd say in terms of your mental health, it's just difficult because you can't really settle. You try and make it your home. I'm quite lucky here. The landlords let me put pictures up, and obviously as long as you make it good when you leave and you try and do your best with that. So but some places you're not even allowed to do that, or really make it your own. So I'm quite lucky here with that. I can at least make it as homely as I can and put my posters on the wall and pictures and things like that. But yeah, it's always just a constant worry. You're never really settled and always worrying about well, what happens if I have to move. And I've got constant alerts looking for rental properties, just in case I might need them and things like that as well. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean I'm the same.
for a while, but yeah.
I think you've got no security, have you? Everyone I know, all of my friends who are my age who are renting, we've all had to move at least once because the landlord decided to sell the property and it wasn't our choice. And I think all of us have ended up moving completely out of the area we lived in because we discovered we couldn't afford to rent anything else there. So I left my job because had to leave the county because it's just so expensive. Up around there in your area, Alison. And I think for me, I felt there was always a low level of stress about the future as well, because as a renter, I don't think I can ever retire. I can only hope that I will never get too ill to work or need to retire because benefits, if I'm even entitled to anything by the time, I'm old enough to retire, they're not going to cover private rents. They just won't. They don't now and they won't then. And so if I can't work, I'm just going to be homeless. So it's quite a horrible thought to have at the back of your mind that you and your family, the people you feel you should protect, they're just going to end up on the streets. It's like something out of a Charles Dickens novel or The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist. And I thought, when I was at school, I thought we'd moved on from that, but it seems like we've turned the clock back a bit. So
And every time you move as well, invariably the rent is increased by quite a high amount as well.
yeah.
Unless you move out the area, like you say. So, and
Yeah.
I don't want to move out the area mainly because of the sort of local community things I'm involved in, like the Labour Party, and I'm involved in local, actually a social housing community trust that we have as well. So, I'm involved in those sort of things. So I don't want to leave because of that. I want to stay in the area if I can. So
Yeah. I mean, I've been reading a bit too about people moving out of their area and councils moving, particularly London borough councils moving people out of London to counties not more further north in the country, but not actually communicating with those local councils. So that's filling up the affordable housing stock that was there for the for the northern councils, but also the infrastructure, not putting any money in from the, to increase the infrastructure in those areas. So I don't know if that's something that you see happening, Stuart. I think it's one of those silent things going on in the background.
Muted. I was muted. I had to do it. It's a trademark of online things. Yeah, it's certainly something that's happening, and it's a dangerous practice. I mean, certainly if you look at places like Blackpool, where the housing stock, because of the nature of the town, is very seasonal. The work is very seasonal. Lots of the housing is units suitable for 1-2 people. So you will find authorities across the country use the area to move people in. And of course, this cuts them off from their connection to society, their support networks. And you'll find that ultimately people end up in a debt spiral. And that in turn damages the town as a place, as all the problems that come along with the debt spiral start to affect everyone else. And we need to be conscious, I think, as local authorities and as areas within Britain, that we can't just shuffle people around to get rid of a problem, that they're not a problem. Having housing that was suitable for those people was something that you could have fixed, you could have actioned. You didn't need to push them somewhere else. You didn't need to make more problems somewhere else. You just had to fix that initial problem of making sure that there was housing stock.
I think that's a really good point, because I feel we're looking through this media narrative that tells us to see people as a problem. People are needing too much, people are taking too much, and then we don't look at the flip side of actually what were those people potentially contributing to their communities and their families and the relationships they had there, and what are we destroying when we force people away and break up those networks. These things happening so often. I think for private renters, I think there's there's other issues as well. Even if they stay in the property, I think there are a number of issues around the living conditions that some people live in. I'm very lucky. I've got a very good landlord now. I've experienced living in less nice places with less nice landlords. And I think the thing is, when you're in that situation, you're very often at the lower end of the rental market, and you don't have a choice about getting out of that. And I think that can be really awful for people's mental and physical health as well. Have you experienced that kind of thing, Alison?
Yeah, definitely. And also it's all right while you are in work. I mean, earlier this year I was made redundant from my job, and and at the same time my landlord at the time heard that I'd been made redundant. I'm not saying there was any connection with the fact that they asked me to leave and they wanted to sell the house, but anyway, I was terrified. I potentially was facing not being able to pay my rent because I didn't have a job, and also I couldn't find anywhere because I didn't have a job, and they wanted 6 months up front and things like that. It was terrifying. And I tried speaking to the council to say, what can I do? They didn't really want to know, because I wasn't their sort of typical person that they would normally help, because I had a good job and things like that. But I was saying, well, okay, but I'm going to lose that job in 3 months. I gave me 3 months notice. And all the estate agents were just saying to me, I have to pay 6 months up front or have a guarantor. But my dad's 90, so he was too old to be a guarantor, and it was just all a bit of a nightmare. So anyway, luckily in the end, I managed to find a new job just in time, literally in the nick of time. But if I hadn't, I don't know what I would have done. I don't know where I would have gone. It was impossible, really. So. And no one really, I felt that nobody in terms of the council or anyone was really willing to help me. So yeah.
It's it's really difficult. I think it's humiliating too. I think because I've experienced, having to find somewhere to live when I was in my 30s, and we realised that the two of us, both working full time, couldn't afford to rent a bedsit together in the local area because that's how bad the rents have got around there, and it's humiliating. And I think that leads me on to the next thing. We were going to talk about the hidden homeless, because there are a huge amount of hidden homeless in this country. So we've got people who are sofa surfing, you know, they've got nowhere else to go and they're having to rely on friends and family. I think there's an even bigger category of people who, like me and my husband, have moved in with family, you know, at an age when you just wouldn't expect to be doing that in your 30s. And I think it's humiliating in itself for you, but also for the family. It puts a real strain on them. And you know, you've got older relatives who feel they have no choice but to take you in, but it's not necessarily how, you know, what they planned for. They don't necessarily really have the space for it, and that can be very stressful. So I think that's a big problem. Stuart, have you heard much about the issue of hidden homeless?
This is something that comes up quite a lot, because, you know, it's one of those issues within society that, like, my union with the community membership really try to go after. You know, you try to protect people who are, you know, on the verge of being homeless or are currently homeless in one way or another. And it's amazing that the issues that being, you know, a couch surfer creates, not just because you're homeless yourself, but the secondary issues where when families, you know, there's been a separation of a couple, they've gone their own way, and that person's had to return home. They think that they're going to be staying with the mum and dad, but then there's the social welfare aspects where if that person is sleeping on the couch, all of a sudden it impacts the social security situation in that household, and they instantly feel like they can't go back. And then they're trying to create situations where they literally skip between house to house to house to try and almost evade the law in many ways. You know, it's as if somebody's after them, and all they're really trying to do is have somewhere safe to stay, somewhere to get a break, get on a housing list, and try and get somewhere to live. But the system's geared up to make it as difficult as possible for these people.
It does feel like it, doesn't it? I mean, I did want to talk about the decline in social housing too, because I remember reading that around the time that I was born, the housing stock in this country was about 40% social housing. And when I read this article, and this was a few years ago now, and I suspect it's even less now, 9% of the country's housing stock was social housing. So that's actually a huge societal shift. And that's got to have a bearing on not only communities, but obviously the individuals within it. I mean, do you see the same thing around your area, Stuart?
Oh, absolutely. The whole thing of, you know, you would buy a home to settle down and put roots down was a really weird idea for me, because you can live in a rented property and still have those same roots within your community. You're still the same person, you're still as equally invested. But there was a whole narrative about buying a house was the way that you settled down and you dug into, that's where you were going to live for the next, you know, how long. And as people, you know, grow and change, and they were moving into different, you know, housing needs, and the whole idea that they would have a second property as an investment, and, you know, it'll be their pension, it'll just be some more income, was just so damaging for the communities, because you weren't getting people who were coming in to the social housing system and it's like, this is where I want to live because I'll be safe and protected. It was people who were coming in and were put into situations where they would be there 2 years and then move on. And it really did damage the community, because the things that you'd want, where it was community groups, volunteering groups, all these things just kind of shrivel up and die when people don't feel like they can hang around for a long time. And social housing, proper, you know, council houses, let people do that. That was the whole point of them, was so people could have a stable, secure life for the long term. And it wasn't about, you know, maximizing profits for somebody's pension.
I mean, yeah, I think I remember there being lifetime leases, weren't there, on council houses, and I think that people could pass them on to their families. And I'm pretty sure that even now, the social housing that we've got, the rules have been changed so that they're talking about short-term leases, and that's just no way really for anyone to live. To not know if they're going to have a home in a few years' time is an awful thing to be hanging over someone's head. Alison, I mean, how do you think it would change your community if you still had that social housing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our social housing is run by a third party. Abri, it's called. So they're in sort of Hampshire and Berkshire. But obviously, they're a third party company that run the social housing. It's very difficult to get on the housing list. I mean, I actually registered when I thought I might become homeless. I actually registered, but it's so complicated and they wanted to know so much. But I had a friend recently who became homeless. Really through no fault of his own, but a relationship breakdown. Became homeless. Windsor, the council, the head of the council for housing, put a notice in the paper saying, "Oh, there's no homelessness in Windsor. It's all resolved." And he tried really hard to get them to house him. And because he was on a lease agreement of his ex-partner, they wouldn't help him. They just wouldn't help at all. And he had to actually spend a night in a park in Windsor, and then we phoned the council the next day and the homeless project, who were really helpful actually, and they got him into a B&B in the end. But I mean, it was just ridiculous, the sort of things that we had to do just literally to get him somewhere to stay overnight. It's horrible, and luckily it was a sort of warmish evening, and it's really difficult because it's easy to say, "Oh, just come and stay on my sofa," but that wasn't really helping him. Do you know what I mean? So you had to sort of be cool to be kind, really. And so to spend a night in the park, and then he got, he did get housed eventually. But it's just, yeah, that sort of thing. It was just awful. The council weren't really willing to help at all, really. So, but that's just my experience here locally. I don't have a great deal of experience otherwise of other councils, but I mean, a lot of my family living in council houses in Hampshire, and they've lived there for many years, and it's great. They seem to think that they're going to be living there forever. So I mean, that's great, and that's what you want. Once you have that, that's what you want, really. But yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how you build a healthy community. You have people invested in their community. You can't expect someone to really, throw themselves into investing in a community that they may be moving out of very quickly. I mean, I've been private renting since I was 12 years old. I've lived in 22 houses in my time, which is quite a few for my age, really. And bearing in mind that I've only lived in a few in the last 10 years, that's quite a lot during the first few decades of my life. And it's limited how much energy you can throw into moving into a new town every year, because in fact that's what I did do from the age of 12 to 20, new town every year, because at 12-month lease, rent would go up. My mum worked so hard, but she just couldn't afford, so we'd move further and further away each time, further away from friends and family, and it's not healthy, I don't think. But I think one of the things I was really shocked to learn is that in most cases, councils don't offer support to single people or childless couples in the event that they're made homeless, because they're not a priority. And I think that's very much to do with the sheer lack of stock that they've got, to the point where they're just edging people even off of an endless list. And it just really upsets me to think that a human being can just be treated like that. I know lots of human beings, and it just devastates me to think that any one of them could be looked at and think, "Oh, it's all right for you to freeze to death in a park, that's fine, just because you didn't tick this box." It's horrendous. I mean, Stuart, did you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad that the government has only legislated to protect children or the vulnerable with various qualities, shall we say. And it would be very easy for them to legislate that there should be no homeless people, that the councils, the authorities, have that mandate to go in and protect everybody to ensure these people are safe. It doesn't take, a political mass class a political revolution to say that people need to be housed and they have that right. That's something that they deserve. That's intrinsically part of being a human in Britain today. And it's very sad that, you know, there's not more politicians who are making these statements. They're very, you know, basic statements that I think most of the population would agree that people deserve to have a house to live in, you know, if they're homeless. And there seems no effort to get it sorted at Westminster level.
It doesn't feel like it's a priority, does it?
No.
No, you know, so.
So, I mean, Stuart, I know you've probably got more involvement with the locals than I do. Is it fair when people say, why aren't the councils doing more? Because I think the immediate response is to blame the council because they're not doing anything.
Well, I don't think it's fair to blame the council, because as an organisation, you know, these councils are operating somewhere between what they legally have to do, what's, you know, set out in law, and an amount of money that they're given to do it with. And that money is shrinking, and what they have to prioritise is what's, you know, in that package of laws that they have to meet, which is why you see, you know, they prioritise spending on social welfare stuff. You're looking at social services, protecting vulnerable people, children. These are things that are mandated in law for them. These will always be their priorities, which is why some of the nicer stuff that you think that the councils would try to prioritise aren't prioritised when people are complaining about, you know, hedge trimming or potholes. It's because those things aren't really, as you know, mandated in law for them to get round to. So they're in this kind of really difficult position as that pot of money shrinks, and those laws aren't really forcing them to get in and make what we want them to do happen. So yeah, deeply unfair, I think, to just blame it all on them. Blame it on Westminster, blame it on the government, blame it on austerity, because those are the real things that are, you know, crippling our ability to put people in houses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know my mum often speaks to me about the fact that when the council housing started to be sold off under Thatcher, the councils were told specifically they couldn't use that money to replace the stock, which, you know, actively drove down the social housing stock that we did have. And obviously with a growing population, then that's just not viable. And I think we've just been on that track for too long. And now with, I think, the cuts to council funding that we've had over the last 11 years, I don't think people realise the sheer extent of them, and that councils are trying to, you know, run the services on a fraction of the money that they had before. So I wonder about the impact actually on the staff taking those calls, because I wonder how well I could cope with listening to people telling me what an awful situation they're in, very fairly, and they should be, because they should expect to be helped. But to hear that and then have to say to them, there's nothing for you, that would stay with me. And to have to say that several times a day, I think would probably damage me quite a lot as a person. So it's a very sad state of affairs, I think. So I mean, Alison, you were talking before about the fact that you're trying to stay in Windsor. You want to stay in Windsor. This is where you're from. You've got your, you know, your family, your friends, your work, your community there. Why do you think people are being forced to move away from their local areas, and what do you think this is doing to their communities?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I've lived here since 2013, so I've travelled all around. I'm from Hampshire originally, but yeah, so, you know, but I ended up here, and then I, you know, became friends with, you know, lots of people here. And also then got involved in Labour Party and local Socialist club and things like that. So, you know, I don't want to move too far away, because I'm part of that. I'm also secretary of Windsor Labour, so I pretty much run it. So, you know, I want to try and stay around and do those sort of things. But people are moving out because they just can't afford to live here. A lot of people are moving to sort of, you know, local towns that are cheaper to live in. You know, I mean, we are quite a small town as well, but there's not a lot of new housing, and obviously a lot of the housing that is new isn't affordable. I mean, there's no affordable housing. You know, I wouldn't be able to get on the housing ladder here because it's just too expensive. You know, I mean, even for a small 2-bedroom house, you know, you're looking at sort of 400,000. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's, you know, the prices are just crazy, and that means a lot of people are staying at home longer. You know, a lot of people's kids are staying home longer because they can't get on the housing market, and you know, so that's causing a lot of, you know, impacts obviously to people who are expecting their children to leave and they're still home at, you know, in their late 20s and things like that. So yeah, that's the sort of impact it's having on communities, and you know, a lot of the younger people are moving out, so they just simply can't afford to live here. On the other side, though, we are getting a lot of people moving here from London because it is cheaper to live here than London, and because of the, you know, the lockdown and people being able to work from home, we, you know, we are seeing the housing prices are going up even more because people are moving from London sort of out to the home counties and things like that. So you know, that's not really helping either. So.
No, I imagine. Stuart, I mean, do you think it's too much for someone to want to stay in their local community? And what do you think of the fact that if a family or a person is offered accommodation out of their area, so it could be halfway up the country by their council, if they turn it down, they're deemed to be intentionally homeless?
I think it's important that people have the right to choose where they live. And if they choose to want to live in the place that they were born, that's something that, you know, has to take priority in a lot of things. There's an incredible value to being connected to, you know, a community. I've lived in the same town my entire life. It's meant that I have really good social links within the community. I wouldn't be able to do what I do politically within the community if it wasn't because I've lived here my entire life. So certainly there needs to be some consideration that when a person says they want to live somewhere, they have that right. That's something that, you know, is important to them, that is part of their makeup, and it is part of, you know, their mental health ongoing. You can't get that back. You can't return. You can't say that you've lived somewhere your entire life if you've moved away for 1 second, can you?
No, you can't. And it's very hard to undo that damage to people once you've done that. I mean, I think we've obviously got a much greater mix of private landlords now. I think that's something Tim mentioned in the comments. Tim has mentioned 2 housing cooperatives, which is something that I've read about very recently, but I don't know too much about. I mean, it sounds like a good idea to me. Alison, do you know anything about this?
Yeah, we're trying to set one up here in Windsor. Actually, there's a group of people that have started to do that, so that's going to be interesting. I've signed up to find out more information from them. But also, I'm involved in a local society. We've got 2 houses. It's part. So we used to have a hall that the Labour Party used to meet in, but it wasn't owned by the Labour Party. It was owned by a society, sort of dating back to the 1800s, and we sold it in the early 90s. Long before I came here, and with that money they bought a house, and they used that to rent out to social housing for key workers in the NHS and things like that at a lower than council house prices. So we now have 2 properties. I'm secretary of it as well, and so I manage the properties, and we rent those out, and that's a very small sort of you know, community housing association, but you know, there are a few of those sort of popping up. And I think, you know, a lot of communities are looking at doing this sort of community housing projects because the council just don't have the housing stock and things like that. So, you know, or the budget. I mean, a lot of councils are, you know, going bankrupt now. I mean, Slough, just down the road from me, they've just gone bankrupt. Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, which is where I live now, they're pretty close to it, I would have thought. So, you know, a lot of these community housing projects are taking over. So, it's good. I mean, I think people feel they need to do something for their children and, you know, for their grandchildren. Otherwise, they're just not going to be able to stay in the area. So
it does. I mean, I remember hearing about garden cities being built, which I think is a slightly comparable thing in my mind years ago. And I think it would be really good if we need to look at these things. But property's so expensive now that I kind of think, where do you get that much money between a group of people? Stuart, do you know much about this area?
I don't, but you know, the whole idea of alternative, you know, methods for creating social housing, controlling social housing, the way we manage it, you know, that's really exciting stuff to be considering. And certainly it's something that if we want to move away from a deeply capitalist housing market, we can look at new models of, shared ownership, ones that take away the need for building up a deposit to buy a house, wherein you could be moving into social housing and then through a number of years take on a percentage of the ownership and then take that somewhere else where you later in life wanting to move into a different property to better suit your housing needs. That's something there that maybe meets somewhere in the middle of people's desire to own the castle, the Englishman's castle thing, and the social housing model. And I would imagine there's all sorts of incredible projects and opportunities to change how we go about living, well beyond just the choice between social housing, private rental, buying a house.
That makes me feel really positive, actually, because this the housing situation is something that makes me feel very depressed, because it's so big and so huge, and there's just so much money involved in it. And I really think we've given enough chances to the people with the money and the power to sort it out, and short of having that Labour government that we could have had in 2017, 2019, I don't see a solution coming from from above anytime soon. And every day that it doesn't, there are people actually dying, but having their lives destroyed in one way or another. So it's really good to hear there are ways we can do things about this. And I think, we definitely have to look at this. I'm so excited you're doing that in Windsor, Alison. I need to start talking to people in
There's
Kent.
quite a lot of student housing cooperatives and things like that as well, because I mean that's another big thing, isn't it? Kids going away to university, and they the cost of their rent is astronomical. I've got quite a lot of friends who are funding accommodation for their children when they go to university. So there's quite a lot of those cooperatives I know that are taking place as well. So to help out, because a lot of those landlords, the private landlords, they try and rip off a lot of the students and don't give them back their deposits and that sort of thing. So
I do worry about what this is doing to our young people, because I do feel this situation. I was just like on the working class end of the first generation. I think I got caught up in certain aspects of it, although obviously it can affect anyone, and that's the whole point. But I think for the younger generation, people who are students now and maybe slightly older than them, this is a lot more widespread, and I think it's damaged me, and I'm sure it's damaging them. And it's just not fair to expect them to put up with this. But on the student landlord front as well, I do remember when I was at university, unfortunately, it's such a very lucrative business. Although there are some very decent and lovely landlords out there, in a completely unregulated market, it attracts a huge amount of very shady characters. And I think that's a huge problem. You've got students paying an extortionate rate, in fact, for rooms that are thick black damp across the walls. Landlords coming into the property. I remember when I was at university walking into the bathroom one day, and the landlord was crawling around in the bath, fully clothed, thankfully, but I didn't even know he was in the house. He just turned up and let himself in. And I've heard of landlords who want the rent, cash in hand. They'll come around every week and collect it, which is a little bit suspicious. And I think young people too, it's the first time they've moved away from home when they go to university, and it's just really sad that we think as a society it's acceptable to subject them to this. And I think no wonder we're getting kickback. I think it's fantastic we've got Acorn Union now. I can see Leanne's mentioned them and Tim in the comments. It's just really good to know that people are getting together and fighting against this.
we tried to get someone along, didn't we, from Acorn, but unfortunately we couldn't get anyone this evening.
No, not this time. Stuart, have you had any dealings with Acorn?
I have. I mean, they're certainly doing a lot of things in our local area. They're building in Newcastle. They're doing stuff in Durham. They're very issue based, and they're taking on a lot of community wealth issues. But I think the big thing that they're doing for me is, giving the information of what your rights are as a renter. They're empowering people to understand, where the line is. where the landlord shouldn't be coming in your house. You know that you've got every right to be in a house that isn't going to make you ill, right? And the work they're doing just to get people educated is incredible.
It's so good to see them doing that, isn't that? And I know that actually they've got a legal challenge against them at the moment from, I presume, some very wealthy estate agents trying to shut them down. They've got a crowdfunder for that. So if anyone is, sympathetic to that and can afford to, if you go over to Acorn's website, if you can afford to contribute to anything to their crowdfunder, because I think it would be a terrible thing to see Acorn finished off by something like this. And I'm sure it won't come to that because they've got a huge amount of grassroots support behind them, but I think this is one of those times we've really all got to stand together and just do what we can. I know we've got members of Socialist think tank who they work to help Acorn as well on a volunteer basis, which is amazing. Alison, do you have any experience of Acorn in Windsor?
No, I don't know too much about them actually, so I'll have to yeah.
They're well worth looking into. I did notice a comment from Leanne before, and she was mentioning about her landlord lives in London, she doesn't, and the rent increases that she has put, added to her rent regularly. She suspects that they're more to do with the increase in her landlord's cost of living in London than, certainly the value of the property that she's living in. And I think that's another thing we've got a bit of an issue with this unregulated market, because, like I say, the rent increases can be as much as the landlord sees fit, and it's not linked to the cost of the property. And all you can really do, if you don't like it, is find somewhere else to live, which is, we say, it's a really costly business. And also, who chooses to move house for the sake of it? It's not a nice thing to have to do, is it, unless you particularly want to. I know. Yeah, it's not what you want at all. Oh, I think Tim's put the link in for Acorn in the chat. Thank you, Tim. And Leanne's a member, which is fantastic. And she said they blocked a bailiff's eviction just around the corner from her recently. And I think one issue, actually, Alison, we were speaking about this before. I've found as a private renter that I sometimes feel looked down upon, I have to say, by people who aren't renters, as if they think that I'm renting because I'm irresponsible, and that I must have done something wrong, and that if even if the landlord's done something pretty awful, I can see them thinking you must have done something to warrant them acting like that because they're a homeowner, so they must be a really responsible, reasonable person. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, quite often people look down and you say, well, why don't you own your own house? Why do you rent? And they're shocked that I have to rent because, I have quite a good job and, it's just circumstances really. I lived abroad for quite a while and then I got divorced and, then I live here. So I can't afford to buy a house here. So, I don't have a huge amount of savings for a deposit and I'm paying so much in rent each month. I can't afford to save any for a deposit, so I live on my own as well now because my partner died, and I've got no chance really of getting out of this anytime soon. So but yeah, people they look down on it, and I think what Stuart said earlier, it's always been drilled into a lot of people, you should own your own house. I mean, I don't see why. As long as I can afford to rent, I'm quite happy doing that, but obviously ideally it'd be nice to own a house and or have a mortgage and do that sort of thing, but yeah, it's just a deposit thing, and while you're paying the high private rents, you literally can't afford, unless you've got you earn mega money, but you can't afford to save for a deposit as well, so it's just impossible.
It is difficult. I mean, I think I've heard people say before, well, you don't have to pay for it, the insurance on the property, and you think, well, do you think the landlord's doing this out of the kindness of their heart and taking the cost on? Of course, that's added on to the rent. Maybe there are some very nice landlords who don't do that, and I know I have a really good landlord now, and I've had good landlords in the past. But in general, that's something that's worked into the rent, and then a lot of landlords especially in Berkshire, Oxfordshire, London, will just apply an annual rent increase just because they're allowed to add another £50 a month on. So they should do that every year because they're entitled to it, even though your salary increase that you've got, if you've got one, might not have been as much as that. So you can often find that people renting a house and the people next door to them have bought their house, and the people renting are paying more money than the people who've got the mortgage. But the people renting, I think this is the other thing I hear from people who own the house, and again, there are good landlords, but there are very bad landlords. And most people who own the home assume that if something breaks in your house with your renter, you click your fingers and the landlord appears and they fix it for you at all, but probably right now. And actually, there are a huge amount of people who are renting properties who, if something does go wrong and they tell their landlord that nothing is done and they just have to put up with it, or if they tell their landlord about it, they're very likely to just get issued a no fault eviction notice and they're going to have to move out because the landlord doesn't want to deal with the hassle of them, which is even more frightening. And so a lot of many renters don't even speak up in those situations. They just put up with it. And I mean, if you could afford to, yes, you could put your hand in your pocket and pay for it yourself. But again, I know of people who've done good things to the home, who've repaired things, only for their landlord to see that they've done something nice to the house and thought, oh, I can get a bit more rent, I'll evict them and put it on the market. It really does happen. And as a renter, that's a huge risk to take, isn't it? I think. I mean, Stuart, have you seen rents in your area go up over the last few years?
I have. I mean, rents in my area are generally quite low compared to the national average, but they are considerably higher than a mortgage would be on that same property, which means that, when people say, why don't you own a home? Why aren't you buying a home? It's just somebody else owns it. You're buying it for them. It's one of those situations. You can totally afford a mortgage because you're paying somebody else's, aren't you? That's the reality of it. Yeah. And rents are creeping up, and we are seeing landlords kind of taking advantage of people trying to invest in the place that they live. I've seen people putting on Facebook, I'm getting kicked out of my house by my landlord, he's putting it on the market, but he's advertising all my garden furniture in my shed and all he's saying it comes furnished and it's my stuff that they're putting in the photos. It's like they'll take anything, won't they? Some of them. There's some real crooks in this system.
There really are, and it's by no means is it all of them. Like I say, there are some really good, decent people out there, but there's no regulation. There's nothing actually to protect or reward those good landlords at all. And the really bad ones, and there are some really bad ones, as you would expect from any industry which has such high, quick returns of cash. They can pretty much do what they like. And from a renter's point of view, all you could really do, there are probably circumstances where you could retrospectively take legal action and sue, but who needs that in their life? Even apart from the cost, you just want to move on, wouldn't you? And you just end up dealing with it. And I see Stephen's put a comment in the chat to say that even with a mortgage you're never really secure because circumstances do change, and it is a very fair point. I think I do feel sad about the extent to which I feel as a renter that renters and homeowners are seen in such a different light, and I think it's important to remember we've got people who've bought into shared ownership schemes who've been trapped into basically rip-off schemes where they're trapped with ridiculous service charges. They're in properties built on floodplains or with other structural issues, which means that they can never actually sell those properties, and they're trapped in an awful situation that they never wanted or would have wanted to be in. You've got people who've bought flats who've got cladding around them, which is basically flammable. It must be terrifying. I don't know how they sleep at night, and it's an absolute travesty that they're being expected to pay to change that themselves, when we've got building developers who have pocketed huge profits off the back of cutting those corners, making those decisions knowingly, and they're not having to pay in any way. The government's contributing nothing to it, and they've just left people to pay for this themselves. What do you think of this, Alison?
Yeah, that's right. But also, with the mortgage, a lot of people because of the lockdown, their circumstances have changed. They've either lost their job. There's been quite a lot of marriage breakups, obviously a lot of deaths, and people found themselves on their own for various reasons. So a lot of people are having to sell the house that they've lived in for years because their circumstances have changed and they can no longer afford it. Whether it's because they haven't got a job or they're now on their own, or things like that. I know so many people around, because the travel industry is quite big around here, and obviously that's where I used to work. So all the jobs have gone in the travel industry around here. So a lot of people have been seriously impacted by it, and so they're all looking to move away because they can't afford to. They have to sell their house here. And they have to move away because they can't afford to buy a house here. So I've seen a lot of that as well. So Stephen's right. Even with a mortgage, you're never really secure either. Because your circumstances might change, and so many people, their circumstances have changed in the last 18 months. It's horrible, really. So many people are really, really struggling with what's happened, because of their job losses, loved ones have died, or a lot of marriage breakups and relationship breakups as well. I know quite a few. So, all those people are having to deal with, selling the house and things like that. And a lot of people, their kids have moved back home, because they've lost their jobs, or they can't afford to live where they were living. It's definitely things that have definitely changed, and that's why the government, or certainly the opposition, need to have some good policies around housing. And I was at the Labour Party conference a few weeks ago, depressing as it was, but the housing topic was a big one. Lots of people wanted to speak on it. I had my hand up, but I didn't get chosen. But lots and lots of people wanted to speak on this topic, and they need some really good policies. They had some good policies in the 2019 manifesto, especially around private renting and protecting them. But they need to build on that and start promoting them as well, because and start sounding people out about some of these policies. But they just don't. I don't know what any of the Labour Party policies are at the moment. But that's what they need to focus on, and that's where they could really win. Some big voters, I think. Whichever party comes up with the best housing policies, really, I think, because that's a big concern, especially for young people. Really.
It's a really fundamental thing, isn't it? And I actually remember, and looking back, I feel terrible. I remember not voting. For Labour in the 2015 election, because I just felt demoralised. And the tipping point for me was that I got sent some sort of survey from the Labour Party, and it said, what's your most important issue? And it listed lots of things. Housing wasn't even on there. And at that time, the housing situation was absolutely destroying my life, was the reason why I couldn't sleep at night, because I knew we were going to end up homeless at some stage, no matter how hard I worked. It was absolutely, and I just thought, it's not even a thing for them. There's no point. There's just no point. I was so demoralised. I just thought, no one cares. And that's why people disengage from politics. And we've got a huge problem with that in this country. I think most people don't vote, don't they? It's council elections, but we recently had a by-election, and 11% of people turned out to vote. And so a really tiny fraction of the population decided the person that will represent and have active influence over certain aspects of the whole community's lives. And we really need to get people engaged. And it was really good to see those policies in the 2017-2019 manifestos. I mean, Stuart, what do you think about the housing policies we had in the 2019 manifesto?
I mean, I thought they were brilliant. Those manifestos really spoke to me. But I think we have an important opportunity now, especially given, how care is being attached to that, your house. A percentage of your house will be going towards your care in the future. And fundamentally, your home is such a huge aspect of your life and who you are, that we need to be building really solid policies, that really is, target things like the care issue, social housing, how we build homes in the future. We don't just want to build cheap, quick housing. We want to build sustainable housing that's, focused around making sure that it's eco-friendly, but cheap to run, so that when the people are in there, it's, cost effective for them. And there's so much opportunity for us to win support by just looking at housing and, getting that really, tighten the screws on the policy, get it really nice, have a real proper alternative we can put forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only do we want to win the support, we want to represent people. I really don't want to leave people to deal with this situation. I want to help sort it out. Alison, I mean, do you feel the same?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's where they need to work on. Some of these policies. Like Leanne just put a comment about no one knows what the policies are. I mean, that's the thing. We don't know what, and that's what we need to be working on now. Not wait until there's going to be an election.
Yeah.
We need to start talking about it now. I mean, there's some leaflet that I got the other day, and we were supposed to hand out to do a Labour Party. It was all about our bringing up helping our kids for their future and things like that, but it didn't really say anything. It was a lot of words on a leaflet, but it didn't really say a lot, I didn't think. We need some real, bullet points. These are the policies, these are the things, and we can start working on those and start spreading the word and getting people to vote for them when the time comes. But, they always leave it to the last minute, and so it seems.
Oh, we've got Mark back. So he's on mute at the moment, but we have got him back, and he has been our tech maestro, and he's been in the background sorting all our tech out for us tonight.
Sorted it out, I think. Can you hear me as well?
So, he's muted on. Asked to unmute. I can ask to unmute him.
Yes. Can you hear me now? I think they can. Because
I can.
all we do. Yes, it's all what we do in the background here, and it's. That was fun. Sorry about that, guys. Well, I said I should have a little sort of like a little sort of like L plate, but I've sorted it out. Thank God for YouTube, eh?
Oh, well done, Mark. Thank you. You have to tell us everything you know about housing now. Is Bill?
Not much. I'm just the tech body who has to do the sort of audio visual.
Just the tech that I'm very grateful that I'm not doing. So thank you for that.
So what were you talking about? Because I've not heard a thing or up until I just.
It's been great. You've missed so much. It's been really good, Mark. You'll just have to take our word for it. So, we were talking about, I think I went off on a tangent because I actually started reading the chat again. So I'm sorry that I neglected the chat during the first half to the lovely viewers, and thank you for the lovely comments.
After I spent all that time setting that up for you as well, Jane.
Oh no, we have been reading. I've been reading them.
Yeah, Alison's been reading them. I've just been really lax during the first half. It was just there were too many things to. My brain was just not working properly with all of it. So we're looking at people being forced out of their local areas and what that's doing to their communities. And I did want to just look at too, do we actually have a problem with a lack of space, or is it just an issue with the systems that we've got? Is it that there's not enough houses? Is it there's not enough land in this country? Are we overcrowded? Or Mark, do you want to come in on that, or do we have a problem with the system?
I think it's more of a problem with the system. When you think about it, we are not overcrowded. We use more land for golf courses, if I remember rightly, than for housing. It's just, the thing is, we view housing as an investment, and maybe we have to start thinking about that differently. And unfortunately, it started going back from when the Tories brought in their right to buy. I'd love to see a right to rent for those who get into trouble. Wouldn't it be great if we did that?
That would be good. Or that's like the council houses, in fact. We could just have council houses again with proper lifetime leases on them. That would be really nice.
But you have to think I've just lost my train of thought, having to work through so many manuals to get this work, and it was just touch a button and it worked. I'm not going to bore you with tech because I can tell a lot about tech. That's my thing.
That's a good thing it is as well.
When we get the left in space one, which hopefully we'll get, Paul will let me do. You'll get all my stuff.
We're doing a sci-fi socialist think tank. That sounds good.
Oh, not so. No,
is it not sci-fi?
No, as in as in what's going on with SpaceX. But we'll leave all that for another time because it's quite interesting.
It sounds complicated.
We do need to talk housing because that's the important thing.
Can I say something controversial?
Yes.
I'm not completely opposed to right to buy. And the socialist inside me is screaming, but I think there are, I don't mean Thatcher's right to buy. What I mean is there is a model out there that allows people to invest in where they live and feel connected, while also, we can put in methods there so that money goes back into building more houses. We need to enshrine that in law, that any money that's used to buy a social housing property is put directly, that must be spent. It can't go anywhere else. It has to be spent on building another home, another 2 homes, another 4 homes. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to voting time, who are homeowners, I don't think would have an issue with that. They can see that as part of a kind of that grey middle ground that, I don't want to sound like a centrist in any way, but I think that there has to be a kind of a slow move away from outright ownership models into more shared ownership, and then eventually just completely community owned stuff. So yeah, I'll probably get slated for saying I like something a little bit Thatcher.
But you can see the point of why people would have bought their house. I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If you got that opportunity, why wouldn't you? I can completely see why people did it. They didn't then build houses to replace those ones for the people that needed them, and I think that's the problem. Big problem we have here is we have a lot of empty properties here, it seems, especially now we've got a lot of empty office buildings, because people are working from home, a lot of offices are closing down. So, what are they going to do with those? They'll probably just redevelop them into fancy, expensive flats and things like that. But some of that should be social housing. We've got quite a lot of military houses that are empty as well here in Windsor, So, what can they do? What can we do about that? Some of those empty properties, should we try and, bring those back into public ownership somehow or something, because they're not being used. They're just sitting there empty. Someone could live there, couldn't they? So,
Mark, what do you think?
Do we need to maybe think about a greater tax on second homes? Sorry, because I've been doing all what I've been doing. I haven't. If I repeat things, I do apologise. But do we need to think about a land tax or maybe even an empty homes tax? Is that something we need to be looking into? Because there's arguments about people who buy homes in near the seaside, which a lot of people have done now. Broadband's getting better, so that they can, because they don't need to be near the office. And of course that does throw out all the people who worked locally, so they have to then commute themselves in.
Yeah, I think it's. Oh, sorry, Mark. I was just going to say, I think we have to be careful the way we talk about things, because it makes me really angry when I walk through Dover, and I used to work there every day and be in the town centre every day before the pandemic, and there's like 5 boarded up shops, then there's one that's still open, then 5 boarded up, and there's about 50 homeless people sleeping down the high street, and you just think, what on earth of a society have we created where this is okay? These precious buildings that need to be protected for nothing, that have been standing empty for 3 years whilst a human being freezes to death outside. It's so wrong, it really is. And we just accept it. I mean, I know we all think it's really wrong, but as a society, why is this happening? How is this just happening and nothing's changing it? I mean, Stuart, do you have similar issues where you are? Or
I mean, I live in a semi-rural area, so homelessness isn't something that you see every day, but it's still there. We still know people. We've still been helping people who have become homeless. And we also have empty homes. That's something that we also have, and putting the 2 things together shouldn't be as hard as it is. You know what I mean? It's basic maths. Empty home, homeless person, put them together, job done. Stephen said there's already an empty homes tax, but to my understanding, it's quite a lengthy process to get to the point where it's like a 300% council tax.
I didn't know
But obviously, it depends on what your council tax rate is, how effective that is at making the homeowner, the property owner, to make sure that building has somebody in it, or to move on and sell it to somebody who will be then living in it. I think that we definitely need a move away from council tax because it's deeply unfair as it is. It's probably one of the most unfair tax systems that we've got in Britain, and that's a big thing to say. And we do need to move towards a property tax where higher values are going to create more revenue that can then be shared across the country.
And do we need
in a fair way?
And do we need to have also a tax for, say, rented properties? Should there be some tax on the rents? And if we did put that tax in, how do we just stop the landlord transferring that on to the tenant? We can only do that with a rent guarantee, surely.
Yeah, this is the thing. Yeah, and I wonder maybe if we need to be looking at, as well as maybe instead of punitive measures, should there be some sort of incentive for renting out properties as social housing? That would be a positive thing to do. But I also feel that social housing is now very stigmatized, and I feel my suspicion is that if people were told there's an incentive for renting your house out as social housing, I think some people would assume if they rent it out as social housing, it will get trashed. I don't know if other people have the same perception. I don't think that's right, but I think there is this stigma within our society now.
But I've got to say that from my job, which I can't do because obviously with whistleblowing laws, even just renting a house out normally, they get trashed. And the number of claims I've dealt with like that. What is the risk? The number of cannabis farms I see and things like that. People using them for those. That could be fun when you're sorting that out, but we'll leave that for another day. But what people don't realise with council housing is it makes money for the council, because when people, and it saves money as well, because when people are not working, there's no money lost on the there's no money lost in housing benefit or that part of universal credit. But when people are working, that then brings in rent to the actual council to use, so it's an actual win-win.
I think as a private renter, to hear you say that houses get trashed, and I know that they do, but it hurts a little bit. It really hurts because I know there are awful people who do terrible things to people's homes, and I know there are good landlords out there who are on the receiving end of that. But as a good tenant, who's always lived every house I've lived in, immaculate, and would never dream of damaging anything or not replacing or paying for it if I had done, it really hurts to hear that, because I do think there's a stigma around renting altogether. And actually, I wonder if the fact that this industry is not regulated is harmful to both sides. I wonder if there was proper regulation. As a tenant, I say that not only to protect the tenant, but to protect the good landlords as well, because the good landlords that I've got and I've had in the past, I'm incredibly appreciative of the fact they are decent, and I would like to see some rules there to protect them properly. I think one of the things that makes me very sad is that we can't have a pet. We used to have a dog. She passed away. We can't have another one because we rent privately, and then although I've got a lovely landlord, they're not comfortable with us having pets, and that's fine in the law. And I think I read the other day only 6% of private properties now allow pets, which is really sad. But actually, I also know that the way the law's set up is really unhelpful, because if we did have a dog, and all the carpets were completely ruined, and we didn't replace anything that had been damaged or chewed up and eaten and damaged, it would be their liability. In law, they'd be viewed as it being their fault because they let us have a dog, and that's not helpful for me, and it's not helpful for them. That needs to change. I don't want them to be unprotected and taking a risk for my sake. I want them to be protected and me to be able to live a normal life. And I think we've got a lot of issues in our system. I mean, Alison, for you, you're a dog owner, aren't you?
Well, I've got two. So a lot of the houses I was looking at when I had to move earlier this year, they would allow one dog, but not two. Oh, that's crazy. That's a ridiculous rule, because having two is probably quite a lot easier than having one, because one might get bored and trash the place. But, I mean, my dogs are house trained and they're very well behaved. So, and I could have got reference from a previous landlord or whatever. But, and I always make sure that I get carpets professionally cleaned and, all of that. I had a bit of trouble, as I said, with my last one. They said that the dogs had weed on the carpet and things. They hadn't. An independent person came in and said they hadn't, but I still lost the case because they said I did. So, it's a risk. But also, I know in the Labour Party 2019 manifesto, they had something in there that landlords couldn't refuse if you had a pet. And I agree, there needs to be something, to protect the landlord as well, obviously, definitely. But, you shouldn't be able to refuse. And I know now, because you used to have to pay an extra deposit and now you don't have to do that. So, I guess a lot of people have said no because of that now. They're not even going to get extra money. I actually pay an extra £25 a month just to have the extra dogs. But, it's a small price to pay, really, for, I've got a nice house. But, a lot of the places I wanted to move to, no, they wouldn't allow dogs, or they would just allow one dog. So, and Stephen said, oh, you can't refuse two dogs. But a lot of places they just did. They refused two dogs. So, nope, you can have one. Like, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't choose. So, I have two dogs, so I can't move there. It's completely ridiculous. So.
It is, and you hear, I've read about people who've ended up homeless before, because they're in a vulnerable situation. They've been offered accommodation, but their pet can't come with them. And I think if you've ever had a pet, then you realise how very important they are. It's just awful to ask someone to give up their pets. It's a terrible thing. I'm not surprised people choose to be homeless rather than, because I probably would have done the same thing. So I mean, some of the rules that I've read in rental contracts, one of my friends is in the process of reading it. She's reading her contract. She's not allowed to put potted plants outside her front door in the new property because for some reason that's offensive to them and they can say what they like. I know her last contract, she had a clause put in it. It was issued around the time of the Paralympics, and I know that this genuinely happened to people in London. She's not in London. I think they just issued their standard contract at the time, said that she has to move out of the property for the whole of August every year. And she did say to them, could you take this clause out? And they kind of said no. So she's just lived there with that clause in, and they've never exercised it, but it's pretty shoddy that that's in there. And at any time they could have come to her and told her to get out of her home for a month. And to be honest, even the fact that was done to renters during the Paralympics, is disgusting, I think.
They wanted to rent it out to someone else, higher rent, I suppose.
Yeah, just for a week or a few weeks. Stuart, what do you think of the rules that are in rental contracts? Is this something you've heard much about?
I mean, I've heard of some crazy things, and we're not really well educated when we go into renting properties. When you move out and you get your first place, and you don't understand most of what's in that paperwork at all, do you? It's not like you get a GCSE and how to deal with a landlord. It just doesn't exist, and we need better education on it. But it also made me think of, we're moving to a system now where like Airbnb is a big thing, and we're moving towards more of these crazy situations as people try and maximize the amount of profit that they can make from a single property, or create situations where it guarantees them a certain income in a method that is, best suited to the landlord rather than people to actually live in a building.
Yeah, and I think we need to find some sort of middle ground, because I don't have a moral objection to someone, I'm a socialist, obviously there's a way I would do things, but I don't have anything against someone buying an investment property if if it's give and take, and if they if they have a decent tenant, if they're happy for that tenant to have some security in knowing that they've got a home for the rest of their life and their children can rent it after them and they will pay their rent, and that's a give and take situation. But Kerry's mentioned in the comments that she's been refused before for having children, and actually living in Oxfordshire, this is something, I don't have children, but have looking at lots of rental adverts whilst I was up there, that is not uncommon. It's very common to see 3-4 bedroom houses in Oxfordshire advertised stating no children, no pets, you must be a single professional. I think there's some rules now about what words you can use. I think they're not supposed to now say no DSS or whatever the equivalent was. That was in just about every advert I ever saw in Oxfordshire. Now they're just right would suit a single professional. professional, and so I take it if you're you have to claim any sort of housing assistance, that there's probably no point in you applying. I feel so sorry for people in that situation. I don't know how they find a home, because it's really uncommon to find someone who'll even consider them. I mean, Alison, you must have seen that in that area too.
Well, I mean, if I hadn't got a job, I wouldn't have been able to find anywhere, unless I had 6 months rent up front and things. It's just, it's crazy, really.
I don't know if I was watching Labour Grassroots once, and this came up, not the Andrew Marr show, and I think it was one of them said that one of their children had been asked for 12 months rent up front as a guarantee. And I mean, right. Talking about what Kerry said, probably to ourselves, this is more pertinent that there have been some people who've been chastised by their landlords for putting up posters, for putting up vote Labour posters. Yeah. I don't know if that. I don't know if you've
blue tack on the walls, pins in the walls. You're not allowed.
You're not allowed to put any banners or anything outside. I mean, I've always asked for permission before, but I mean, I always stick my vote Labour banner outside. Pictures on walls and things like that is always a thing, and you've always got to make it good. I always go around with a polyfiller, whenever I move and things like that. But it's all part of it. It's not really your home, is it? It's someone else's home that you're borrowing for a bit, and things like that. So
it is. And Stuart, do you think it's actually healthy to have that in your mind, to be living in a situation where it's not your home you're living in? There isn't a home for you.
No, you want to be somewhere where when you do something to where you live, it feels useful. It's a bonus to how you live your life. And you don't want to live in a place where if you make a change, it's ultimately pointless, because if you've improved it and added any value, it's the landlord's value. And, if you've changed it in any way, you've hung some pictures up, it's like, that's going to cost me 50 quid to fix in the future. Everything feels like a negative when you're in that position. Whereas I live in, a property with a mortgage. I can go do whatever I feel like within reason, you know what I mean? I want to paint the walls purple one day, that's not an issue. I want to stick in a bathroom that's different, not an issue. These are, opportunities for my well-being, my mental health, my expression of personality, that are just completely absent from a lot of people who are renting private properties. They just don't have that.
They don't. Mark, what do you think of this?
It is a problem. I always remember being around a friend's house and he said, I want to get my own place because I want to put up my own posters and what have you. It's a shame to not have that the landlord has certain places for people to do that. I remember back when I was at uni, in theory you were only meant to put posters up on this notice board that they had in your room, but most people ended up putting them on all. I can give you the science behind that if you want, why it does it with blue tack, but that's another story, which is what I was there doing in uni, but with chemistry and surfaces. Fun. It is one of those things, and I think maybe there has to be some rules. I wonder sometimes, Acorn maybe needs to look at a section for landlords, for good landlords, and how they would want landlords to act instead of just being aggressive all the time. Sometimes it might be an idea to have something so that they could ask peace pipe. I don't know. Do you understand what I mean by that?
The landlords need protection as well, of course, and you need to make sure that people don't completely wreck your house, and there needs to be a limit to things. And I remember one of the houses I lived in, I did paint the wall. I asked if I could paint the walls, and they said yes, as long as you paint it back to whatever colour it was, like some sort of green colour, before you leave. And I did that, and it was fine. But I think as long as But they don't want their house trashed, and of course, so you need to make sure. But I think with things like picture hooks, if you've got pictures up, it's sometimes better to just leave them up, because the next tenants might want pictures in the same places, rather than taking them off the wall, polyfilling, and trying to repaint it and not quite doing it right. Sometimes better just leave it there. And I did suggest to my last landlord, I had a shelf up. I said, well, couldn't I just leave it up, because it might be useful? And they said, oh no, you need to take it down. And I damaged the wall, and it took ages to polyfill it and everything. And I probably made a worse job of it. And then they charged me because I had to fix it. And it's just it's crazy. So, but yeah, so, but certainly landlords need some protection as well, but there needs to be, maybe, protection on both sides.
I do think that's a really good idea, Mark, actually, because I think this us and them and like culture is really unhelpful. I talk about the things I hate about renting and the terrible things about the rental market, and it sounds like I hate all landlords, but I don't. I'm really grateful for the really good ones. And I think to open a dialogue too, because that's not something that happens too often either. I mean, Stuart, what do you think of the this divide, the us and them not communicating with each other in that way? Is that helpful?
I mean, clearly the communication's fundamental to getting any progress in life in any aspect. And certainly we're working with the extremes. We're always talking about, the bad landlords and the bad renters. And it would be nice if there was a forum, for people to come together. Certainly it would help us get to a position where we would have policy and legislation that would be protecting all parties. We'd be able to tear up the rule book and start over, and we could fundamentally change the issue at hand, around housing. We could really do something. And I'm not saying anything from the government. There's no push there to make sure that renters are well represented. Certainly there's still strong representation for landlords from the government perspective. I don't know how we get everyone together. I'm used to, with trade unionism, being part of who I am now. If there's a decision maker, you've got to pressure them, you've got to have leverage. And I don't know if we're just going to have a sit down talk about the situation, whether there's going to be the leverage there to get the change you want.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because in a trade union situation too, you've got a company, and a company is a group of people. And I think there's a big difference between there's some huge landlords, there's corporate landlords, and there's some very big, very wealthy landlords, some very bad ones of those. And then there's lots of just individual people. And so, you don't want a ganging up situation. It's not that we want to be bullying the small landlords. So I think some sort of forum where we could talk about what sort of regulation would work for both sides, what's fair, give and take, would be a really good thing. Acorn seems like a good forum for that. Maybe Socialist Think Tank Southeast could facilitate some sort of dialogue. That would be very good. So, I mean, Stuart, you mentioned the representation for landlords amongst the government. A huge proportion, or a staggering proportion of MPs are landlords, aren't they? And that really galls me, actually, because I think quite often the ones I've read about have also been given a second home in the most expensive town in the country from, the public coffers. And I'm a bit at a loss as to why they've asked for that when they've already got several properties of their own and a very good salary.
It's an interesting idea, because many of them are landlords, but they're also in receipt of welfare payments to help them rent in London. You know what I mean? Or help towards their living costs in London. So if anything, they should have some kind of idea of how it works for, many people across Britain, but it seems such an abstract for them. I don't think nothing's going to get through. I don't know how many MPs are genuine renters. It would be nice if there was, an MPs renter group where they were sitting down, and that experience would maybe carry more weight. Certainly when you attach the letters MP to somebody, when they say something, it gets a little bit further. If we could track down how many MPs are genuine renters, I think that'd be a really powerful piece of information.
That would be interesting. Mark, what do you think?
Just trying to find some websites for later. Yes.
Oh,
Queuing
sorry.
a book because we have to. The way we all see each other on in the panel is slightly different to what comes out on Facebook, etc. So I have to remember, and that's what I'm trying to do. It's sort of like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time, and you have to remember that. So if something plays in our chat, it doesn't matter. But anyway, I was saying, I was wondering how many renters, how many Labour MPs are renters, and I've heard it said, and let's remember that when you are paying rent, you are buying somebody else's house. And one thing I've often said is, what rental payment be classed in your credit agreement, as good credit, to show that you're able to pay for a mortgage. You've seen all the memes around that we don't think you're good enough to pay for £500 a month for a mortgage, but a landlord will happily get you paying £700 for his rent and insurance and everything else like that. Do we need to form new forms of building societies, which is not the traditional sort, because the building society was to build houses, but to actually put our savings into them with better ways to grant mortgages to people? Because like Stuart, I'm not totally against people owning their own homes. I think it's more, as a socialist, it's more about commercial property and means of production, rather than what you personally own. And owning the means of production can be like me as a photographer. I own my own cameras. Doesn't mean about everything has to be nationalised.
Yeah, I think the mortgage application thing and the credit rating thing is a good point. Because I know when I lived in Australia for a bit and I came back to the UK and I didn't have a very good credit rating because I hadn't lived here for very long. And, I couldn't get a mortgage actually at the time. So, it's crazy. But then the rent I'm paying is probably twice as much as what a mortgage would be. So, it's yeah.
Is Kerry's put a comment in the chat just saying that she's been renting. Does that say for 1 year or for 7 years?
7 years.
But she's had to move 3 times during that due to landlords selling the properties, despite the fact, she's been a model tenant, she's paid all her rents on time, there's nothing she can do about that. So apart from, the large removal costs she must have incurred through that, they're just disruption to her child as well. And, I have a friend who had to change secondary schools at I think 3 or 4 times because they were in a family that was renting privately and they had to keep moving. And new child at a school, they got bullied awfully. It was a horrible experience. It was very damaging. But I think even I remember for me moving, I think our house got repossessed when I was 12, and that's when this series of rentals started. We moved out of the place where all our friends were, and I gradually lost contact with them, and they probably would have been, they were very close friendships going back years, and they probably would have been quite a stable thing for me to have kept through my life, or through those teenage years. And it does make a big difference, I think. I can't imagine what it must be like as a parent to your children go through that.
Yeah,
and of course, all the moving doesn't do your credit rating any good. So again, if you did want to get on the
4 times in 8 years, so I know this. Yeah, it's not good. Yeah.
Stuart, do you know, is that an issue for people in your area? Children having to change schools or being affected by moving house, or
it is. I mean, it's a big issue. It literally tears people apart. The moving home is one of the most stressful things that you can do, apparently, and doing it that often, that's not going to be good for your health overall. But one of the things I think that we could introduce is if people had the right to buy their privately rented homes, when when the landlord says, look, I need to cash out, I want my pension, I'm going to go do whatever with it, there is a system in place, maybe, you know, a government-backed mortgage system to allow people who are already affording the rent to take on that property and, you know, ensure that their life, their you know, connection to the community, their children's lives, their children's educations can continue as it was, you know, without any disruption.
That's a brilliant idea.
We talk about mortgages, but aren't you know, and let's bring up the Preston model. We haven't done it yet tonight, as far as I'm aware. But aren't Preston looking at making their own local council, a local bank? Be interesting to see how they're if they're going to do lending and what could happen there through them. That kind of reminds me of, you know, like what Stuart was saying about being able to buy the house. That was one in the manifesto in the 20, I think it might have been 17 rather than 19. One of the things with companies was if somebody wanted to sell up, there had to be an option to offer it to the workers to see if they wanted to make it a co-op, you know, a co-op, and maybe that is something that needs to be looked into. And how do we help? Because the thing's going to be, and I hope, I don't want to tell the Tories what to do. One of their main tranches is homeowners, but as people, younger Generation X and millennials just can't get on the ladder, they're going to be screwed. You know, they can't. They're going to take our houses away. Well, we don't own a house. Who cares?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to sum it up, basically, I just wanted to go around and ask everyone: do you think that housing can work for the 99% under a neoliberal, you know, system such as we've got now? And if not, what else can a socialist policies offer to improve the situation? Alison.
Yeah, so, well, obviously things aren't working now. You know, a lot of people are feeling insecure in their homes, which, you know, obviously isn't good. There's still a lot of homelessness, even, you know, safe surfing and things like that. So, yeah, I think they definitely need to look at some policies to put in the manifesto, you know, for the next election. I think that's really important. And, you know, whoever gets it right is probably going to, you know, get that youth vote as well. Because I think it's something that young people are really, I mean, not that, you know, I mean, we're all, I'm old and I'm concerned about it, but, you know, a lot of young people are really worried, you know, how are they going to get on the housing ladder and, you know, this sort of thing. So, yeah, I think definitely it needs to be in the policies. And we need to start talking about it soon.
Yeah, we do. We really do. Stuart, do you think that housing can work, you know, for the 99% with the neoliberal system?
Certainly not under the system that we have now. We can't depend on this system to offer the social value we need and the protections that we want and deserve. If it's so, you know, fundamentally driven by extracting profit, we've got to move away from that and find new models that prioritize human beings and social value.
Absolutely, yeah, I think so too. Definitely, the way this government's going, I just can't see that they're going to do anything good. They seem to have completely different values to me, and I don't know if you could maybe make it better under a more capitalist focused system, and well, I'm sure you could in fact, but I don't think they're going to. And I think we had so much to offer with the policies we had in the socialist policies, you know, even down to details like insulating private properties too, so that renters can actually afford to pay their utility bills, which would have been a great thing right now with the energy hikes that we possibly might not have seen under a socialist government anyway. But Mark, I'll leave it over to you now. What do you think?
I'm not sure it could do, but I do think that obviously as we are socialists that we need to be looking towards a socialist system. Can ownership be part of that? Possibly, but it needs to be, prices need to be regulated. We have seen over the last 40 years that the market has failed. End of story. Be that utilities or in housing. It has now got so expensive that younger people cannot rent. That will cause cannot buy rather. That will cause a crash.
Well, both. I think you were right the first time too.
Mm-hmm. But let's also remember, for those who are renting, there are unions you can join to help you. Obviously, we've got you've got Acorn. We talked a lot about Acorn, but there's also London's Renters Union. Now, if you want to find them them out on the web, you've got London's Renters Union, which is all one word .org, and also, as we mentioned, Acorn. We've mentioned them several times. Go on their website. They normally work through having a local branch, but I'm sure if you mention to them, and they can probably put together people to form one, or come to us at Socialist Think Tank, and we'll try and help you and Acorn get something together. And their website is all the W's, www.acorn.org.uk.
There's a organisation called Generation Rent as well,
Yeah.
who are doing some good things too. And I think they're doing a survey at the moment to get renters' experiences. They've done a lot of things to try and put pressure on the government to implement good policies. So if you look up Generation Rent as well.
Yep. So I think that's about it for everyone on this, isn't it? Tonight. Just want to say we're Socialist Think Tank, and it's not just us on the screen, it's you. So thank you to all of the people who've put some stellar comments in our comment board. One thing that we do is it's not just us on the panel, it's you as well. You are the 5th member of the panel, and we'd like you to become a member. That's where I started back in January this year. I saw Paul and Laura on Labour Grassroots, and now look at this 10 months later. I'm doing it. So join us. It's socialistthinktank.com. We want to not just have West Midlands. We don't want to have just South East. We've got a London group in the offing, and I think a Wales and one up in York area as well. And we want to get other groups talking about socialism in their local areas. So please join us. Go to socialistthinktank.com and join us. It's totally free, but all the tech we use costs money, and so you can give a little bit. If you can give a little bit, we're grateful for that. But we wouldn't be socialists if you couldn't join for free. So please get involved. Obviously, thank you to Paul and everybody who's trained us to do all this. I know we now know how hard it is, don't we, Jane?
Yes, and to Laura as well.
Yeah.
The organising she does in the background, amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're coming. Obviously, everybody will be back on Tuesday. Stuart and the guys, with John and Paul and Laura and Sam. Congratulations to Sam on getting onto the Future Leaders Programme as well.
Sam will be amazing.
Yeah, but she put that on Twitter. So join them on Tuesday, and we'll see you all Tuesday and get involved join the Discord and everything else like that. So thanks for listening in. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody wave and all that kind of thing.
See you later.
See ya.
We keep the red flag flying there.